happiness income paradox. Contrary to the materialists, happiness doesn't increase when income increases. When the happiness levels and income levels in dozens of countries around the world are tracked over a long period of time, it becomes evident that more material wealth does not equal more happiness. But other studies paint a darker picture. Once basic needs are met, a person's happiness is strongly correlated with perceived social rank and relative status. In other words, how rich are you compared to other people? Research shows that relative wealth and comparative status play a dominant role in people's happiness levels. This is why a millionaire, despite all his wealth, can still be very unhappy if his social circle is filled with billionaires. And why a billionaire can feel very unhappy if his social circle is filled with mega billionaires. The paradox here is that a person can endlessly increase his wealth. But if those around him are increasing their wealth at a faster rate, then he'll eventually become less happy over time. This phenomenon is referred to as the relative income hypothesis. What researchers have found is that it's a part of human nature that people who have higher status than those around them naturally feel more confident, have higher self-esteem, and are more happy. This is even seen in the animal kingdom. By contrast, those with lower social status have higher levels of depression, stress, paranoia, and mental illness. This has huge implications for how we understand the connection between happiness and the economy. If people's happiness is so closely tied to relative status, then a constantly growing modern economy is much more a source of despair than it is of happiness. Just consider the reality of the ever-burgeoning wealth gap, where 1% of the world's people own 50% of the world's wealth. The gap between the rich and the poor is absolutely unprecedented in modern times. And due to the relative income hypothesis, this also means that the levels of unhappiness and depression are also unprecedented. And the salt in the proverbial wound is that media technologies like TV and social media display the lives of the rich and famous in agonizing detail, which only heightens the sense of relative privation in the minds of the 99%, leading to dissatisfaction and depression on a global scale. Consider this paradox. People in developing countries have actually become wealthier in absolute terms over the past century. But despite the increased wealth, their overall happiness has decreased. How can that be? This is because they experience themselves as poor. Why? Because relative to Western economic growth over the same century, they're poorer in comparison. For example, colonialism and capitalism have without a doubt made the Muslim world and the developing world wealthier in material terms than it's ever been. But overall, people in the developing world, in all these countries, feel poorer and feel less happy. Why? Because in the past, their wealth was relatively equal to Europe or even higher. But even though they have more absolute wealth now than they did in the past, their relative position compared to the West has dropped. Due to colonialism and other factors, the West grew richer at a far greater pace, creating an insurmountable wealth gap. This global inequality generates a lot of unhappiness, paranoia, and depression for poor nations. And by the same token, it generates a lot of happiness and satisfaction for richer nations who feel good about being above others. But is the wealth gap between richer and poorer nations really insurmountable? Can't developing nations eventually catch up to the West and enjoy equal wealth and status? Doesn't a capitalist global economy provide a fair playing field for all? The answer is a resounding no. What theorists like Immanuel Wallerstein and Thomas Piketty have pointed out is that the liberal capitalist model does not account for structural inequality. The reason that 1% of the population owns 50% of the world's wealth in an ever-growing wealth gap is not due to sheer hard work and perseverance. The reason that Western nations have had overwhelmingly more wealth and held overwhelmingly more control over the rest of the world for the past few centuries is not due to sheer ingenuity. Rather, there's a clear structural inequality hardwired into global capitalism that prevents other countries from being able to catch up with the West. Sociologist Emanuel Wallerstein points to the fact that because the technological revolution began in the West, they were able to accumulate a great deal of capital. Using this capital, they were able to invest more into research and development, R&D, more so than other nations, which led to more innovation, better products, more high-tech products. Other nations couldn't compete with this, and so they were locked into a low-tech economy relative to the West, where they're producing low-margin, low-tech goods and raw materials. Meanwhile, the Western nations create better, higher-tech goods and sell those at higher margins, which brings more profit, which they can invest in more R&D, more innovation, and the vicious cycle continues. This is a structural inequality that prevents other countries from catching up. The modern wonder of progress and constant economic growth is actually a modern nightmare that keeps the majority of the world's population in a perpetual state of inferiority. Isn't mankind supposed to live free? Maybe freedom is exactly the problem here. The whole purpose of endless technology and endless consumption is to give us more and more freedom. The life of inconvenience and perpetual toil of our ancestors is no more. Now we can live comfortably with all our needs, food, shelter, sex, entertainment, literally available to us at the touch of a button. And if a button is too taxing, just give voice commands. But even this is not good enough. Even this is not as convenient as possible. What if chips could be implanted in the brain so that we can order the pizza with our thoughts? But then we would have to chew the food, quite a chore. What if we could just automatically inject the nutrition of the pizza into our bodies and then virtually simulate the sensations of enjoying a pizza? But then why allow a clunky body to limit our freedom in the first place? Why not technologically enhance our bodies, or better yet, ditch our bodies altogether by uploading our consciousness into the cloud so that we can exist in a state of perpetual cybernetic bliss? Isn't this the logical end of freedom? Freedom realized to its fullest potential? But of course, this freedom would also mean no more human body. And no more human body means no more soft touch of another's warm embrace, no more watching the sunset, no more smelling the rain, no more reveling in the joyous laughter of your children, no more human life as we know it, the extinction of the human race. Is there another path?